Well, of course, Stonewall Jackson will become the famous Stonewall Jackson on July 21, 1861, because the men in his ranks will stand upon Henry Hill and stand there like a stone wall. There stands Jackson like a stone wall, would declare General B. And Jackson, indeed, with his force, would stand there and actually help turn the tide of battle, which was not going well for the Confederacy at that moment, turn the tide of battle and ultimately help lead to the great Confederate victory of July 21, 1861 on Henry Hill in the Battle of First Manassas. But who were these men that enabled Stonewall Jackson to earn that nickname? And who were these men who stood there on Henry Hill like a stone wall? Well, many of these men were from the lower Shenandoah Valley. These were men from Jefferson County, Berkeley County, Clark County, and Frederick County, Virginias. And these men who stood with Jackson there on Henry Hill were many of the same men who had arrived in Harpers Ferry that third week of April, right after the Army and Arsenal had been seized, arrived there, drilled there, were trained there by Thomas Jonathan Jackson while he was the commandant at Harpers Ferry. And so there was a bond between Jackson and the local boys who had come up out of the lower Shenandoah Valley to join the Confederate Army. They became the Stone Wall. Well, who were these people? Well, let's take a look for a moment as to who comprised what became known as the 2nd Virginia Infantry. The 1st Virginia Brigade was comprised of 5 Virginia regiments. These 5 regiments totaled a little under 3,000 men. And one of those regiments, known as the 2nd Virginia Infantry, was principally the lower Shenandoah Valley Regiment. And in the 2nd Virginia Infantry were 10 companies of men. Now, a company at full strength was supposed to be about 100 men. So theoretically, the 2nd Virginia Infantry at full strength was 1,000 men as a regiment. It never equaled 1,000 men, not even at the beginning of the war. Most of the companies had anywhere from 400 to 600 men, if that many, most of the companies usually had about 70 to 80 men. The regiment itself may have been between 600 and 800 men, even at the beginning of the war. So here was the composition of the 2nd Virginia Infantry. Company A came from Charlestown and was commanded by Captain John W. Rowan. Company B came from Shepherdstown, known as the Hamtramck Guard, and they were commanded by Captain Vincent Butler. Company C came out of Clark County, and they were known as the Nelson Rifles and were commanded by Captain William Nelson. Company D came from Martinsburg, from Berkeley County, commanded by Captain John Quincy Adams Nadenbush. Company E came out of Berkeley County, and they were known as the Hedgesville Riflemen, and they were commanded by Captain Raleigh Colston. Company F, now this is our Frederick County company, were known as the Winchester Riflemen, and they were commanded by Captain William Clark Jr. Company G, we come back to Jefferson County. Company G was known as the Botts Grays, named after Lawson Botts of Charlestown, but not commanded by Botts. The Botts Grays actually were commanded by, they were commanded by Lawson Botts initially. He soon will be raised to the rank of major, but initially at the outbreak of the war, it's commanded by Captain Botts. Company H, the Letcher Riflemen, named after the governor of Virginia. They come out of Duffields, tiny little Duffields here in Jefferson County, and they will be commanded by James H.L. Hunter. Then we go back to Clark County for the Clark Rifles. They came out of the Berryville area, and they will be commanded by Strother H. Bowen. And then finally, the final company, the 10th Company of the 2nd Virginia Infantry, Company K, was known as the Floyd Guard, named after former Secretary of War John B. Floyd, and they were based out of Harpers Ferry. Many of the armorers joined this company in response to John Brown, and they were commanded by the mayor of Harpers Ferry, George W. Chambers. So 10 companies from the 4 lower Shenandoah Valley counties, all totaled about 800 men who are soon going to do battle on Henry Hill and stand like a stone wall.